I pressed the square of paper between my damp palms, trying not to crumple it. My breath sounded too loud in the bare corridor outside the committee room. Against the whitewashed walls, the black words stamped across the paper screamed in my mind. Application denied. I remember I tried to smile, a small tight thing, when Professor Nunez handed the letter to me. He couldn't quite meet my eyes. I saw pity there, or maybe irritation. He was tired of students bringing him their wild ideas, their doomed proposals, hoping he'd wave his magic wand. "You're not thinking practically, Andres," he said, low and firm. "This is not a good use of resources." He muffled a sigh, slid my portfolio towards me across the table. The committee members shifted uncomfortably. I caught Carmen's apologetic glance. She'd advised my thesis. I felt the urge to say something persuasive, but my jaw locked. All the supportive words I had prepared were gone, replaced by the roar of shame. I heard the low rush of the air vent, the scratch of someone's pen, my own pulse hammering. Outside, in the corridor, I pressed my forehead to the cool wall and tried not to cry. There's something childish about tears when you're 23, grown enough to feel foolish as hope is crushed, but not old enough to hide how much it hurts. Everyone in my family warned me about dreams that strayed too far from the ground. My tia Lucia called me El Cientifico Loco at every lunch. A good civil job and a stable paycheck, Papa always said, that's what builds a house. When I'd explain my proposal, integration of gene therapy with neural AI predictors for rare diseases, they'd nod and offer worried smiles, then mock me as soon as I left the room. Andres and his little robots. It hurt, but some part of me still believed if I just worked hard enough they'd see. The committee rejection felt final. It wasn't just about funding. There were doors that close and echo thunderously inside you. The laughter at home, the patronizing smiles of neighbors when they asked about my project, all circling sharks. That night after the rejection, I walked the city until my phone died. Madrid's heart beat around me, bar fronts glowing, traffic humming, a city alive with ambition. I felt like a ghost, untethered and invisible. I drifted back to my parents' flat near Legazpi long after midnight. The city's light washed my hands orange as I let myself in. Papa was still awake. He sat at the kitchen table, hunched over his Sudoku book, small glasses perched on his nose. He didn't look up as I walked in. "So," he asked, eyes fixed on the page. "They said no." I tried to sound casual. He grunted, eyes unmoving. "Maybe it is for the best. You can look for a job now." The words sank into the soft part of me, bruising. Mama put a coffee next to my elbow the next morning, silent apology. But by lunchtime, she was on the phone with my tia, talking about that research thing. They turned him down, pobrecito. He works too hard, maybe now he'll see sense. I was not invited to family gatherings for a while. Not because anyone disliked me, but because in Madrid, there's nothing so humiliating as returning home a failure, especially a failure who dared to dream beyond what neighbors can imagine. I applied to every lab for months. At first politely, then more desperately, emails, calls, knocking on faculty doors. No one wants a theorist with a rebellious glint in his eye and a reputation for unrealistic proposals. The public failure followed me. At the local panaderia, Carmen's cousin Pedro raised his brows. "So, Andres, you still inventing?" Neighbors who never cared about CRISPR or neural nets suddenly had opinions about practical careers. My sister Marta started introducing me as between things right now when friends asked. She meant well, but her eyes never met mine. That winter, I took work as a night cleaner at a biotech company outside the city, scrubbing floors next to racks of humming servers, inhaling the sharp scent of ethanol. I watched researchers pass by, badges flashing. Sometimes I'd pause outside a lab's glass doors and watch them run experiments. It was torture and education at once. One night after mopping, I lingered near the whiteboard in the break room where someone had sketched a protein sequence. I corrected an annotation almost subconsciously. The next day a new note appeared. "Who corrected this? Thank you." It thrilled me enough that I did it again, left a question, circled an error. After a month, Dr. Prieto, whose badge shone with seniority, caught me. I thought I'd be fired. Instead, she invited me to her office. She grilled me over coffee in rapid Spanish, half convinced I was pulling a prank. I answered quickly, honestly. She saw the rejection letter in my file, her lips curled, not quite a smile. "So you think you're clever?" "I just want to work," I said. She offered me a part-time research assistant contract, at the bottom of a long ladder, but inside the lab at last. I cried that night in my boxy rented room near Atocha, gasping into the cheap duvet, letting the relief burn my shame into something cleaner. The next years were a grind. Mornings started before dawn with data cleaning, afternoons spent triple-checking code, nights with pipette in hand. It was quiet, anonymous work, sometimes demeaning. Many days I questioned if the committee had been right. The reminders of my family's skepticism didn't fade. On the rare Sundays I made it home for lunch, Papa would still say, "You know, Andres, there are jobs at the Comunidad. Insurance, city planning." And every Sunday after, I'd walk home across the bridge over the Manzanares, Madrid stretching out gold and blue around me, and think about surrendering. But on some cursed lightning crack day, something would click. A dataset would open up, a line of code would finally compile, or Dr. Prieto would toss me the keys to a project no one else wanted. I kept building piece by piece. Then came the epidemic. Rare, genetically driven, immune modulated, almost no one affected in Spain but spreading fast in South America and parts of Italy. Most labs ignored it. To them it was a fluke, someone else's problem. But I remembered what the rejection committee didn't see, the map of rare disease pathways, the spots where my idea could fit. I begged Dr. Prieto to let me work nights on an offshoot. Gene-based disease modeling assisted by the same neural predictors I'd pitched once long ago. "It won't distract from the main lab," I promised. She said yes, mostly to get me out of her hair. For months I lived in the lab. I slept under my desk, feasted on vending machine sandwiches, saw the city only through taxis at dawn. The models worked, then failed, then worked again. Dr. Prieto began forwarding my reports to the parent company. A corridor of investors and managers trickled through to watch me fuss over clusters of code and wet samples. Suddenly, the disease that was not our problem became panic-worthy. Someone saw the commercial potential. With the lab's data and my model, we identified mutational clusters down to the town, the village, the family. We predicted and mapped transmission. It made governments nervous and pharmaceutical companies greedy. A foundation funded us. Big technocrats from Germany, the US, and Japan started calling, asking for public health support. One night, Dr. Prieto called me into her office. She poured 2 glasses of wine, handed me mine. "Tomorrow, we're presenting your model at the consortium conference. Board wants you to lead it." I stared, my hands shook so much I almost spilled the wine. Outside, Madrid murmured through the open window, traffic on Paseo del Prado, the chestnut trees leafing out in the summer heat. That night I didn't sleep. I wandered the city, too wired to rest. The street lights turned the sidewalks gold. Every shadow seemed to hold a memory of the old shame, the laughter, the rejection. I wondered if I would fail publicly all over again. At the conference I stood before a hall of faces, some familiar, many strangers, professors, government reps, international journalists. Dr. Prieto's hand squeezed my shoulder before I stepped up. My voice trembled only at first. I started with the story of the disease, data, not dreams. I mapped the spread, showed the prediction clusters. Then I unveiled the model. Lines of code, case maps, real-world impact. This time there was no room for laughter or mockery. Reporters scribbled. A professor from Paris asked questions, sharp and probing. I answered in clear, direct Spanish. There was applause, cautious at first, swelling as the room caught on. Dr. Prieto flashed me a feral grin from the edge of the stage. The following weeks blurred, interviews, more presentations, frantic partnership calls. Suddenly, my phone was full of messages from old classmates, LinkedIn contacts, professors who once barely nodded to me. Less than a year after, our protocol was adopted by the Health Ministry, and I was quoted in El País. Dr. Prieto invited me to formally lead a spin-off team, a non-profit arm with my name on the project's papers. There was talk of a prize. Sometimes, on the late nights back from the lab, I would ride the metro home, watching tired workers with their lunch bags, feeling the press of it all, the shame, the strain, the insane, hushed pride. Still, the sense of home called to me in quieter ways. La Latina in the early morning, strong coffee and hot churros, the hiss of city buses, the old women watering plants on their balconies. I wanted not just to win but to be seen as myself where I'd begun, stripped of performance. I dreaded it too. Would they really claim me now? Spring crested over Madrid, viral panic receded. The health minister called and asked if I'd host a live demonstration for local officials and media, explain simply what my team had built. I said yes. The venue was a big new bioscience center, all glass and chrome, just north of the university where I'd failed. This time they wanted my family invited for the papers for the television cruise. I resisted the urge to refuse. Instead, I sent the invitation itself to my parents, to Marta, to my tios, to Carmen, who, after all these years, now sent periodic emails congratulating me. On the morning of the demonstration, Papa buttoned up his best brown jacket, the one he wore to weddings. He mumbled on the phone, "You should see the suit Mama bought for this. She's been showing your picture to everyone at church for weeks." I cut through the crowd outside the center, familiar faces amid Madrid's press. Some old neighbors laughing with journalists. I heard my name called out tentatively, half with respect, half with curiosity. Inside, I shook hands, answered questions. Mama clutched her phone, snapping blurry photos, fixing my tie with chatter I barely heard. Marta clung to my arm for a minute, smiling so hard I could see her old braces. The heads of the university's bio department were present. Professor Nunez stood at the back, an unreadable look on his face. Carmen, beside him, beamed quietly. I took the stage, smaller than the conference halls, but enormous because of who watched. I cleared my throat. I remembered the words I'd practiced the night before, then let them go. Instead, I said, "Many years ago, I stood outside a room in this very university with a letter telling me I would fail at this work." The crowd stilled. I felt my heart thumping in my chest. I outlined our model. Only this time I pulled up the live feed, real-time prediction, infection clusters appearing city by city, showing a map of Spain rippling, alive with data. I walked through an actual case, a small region in Castilla where an outbreak had been averted by our model's forecast. I read aloud the letter from a family whose daughter was given a life-saving therapy, targeted perfectly because of the genetic work we'd done. I looked at my parents, Papa's lips pressed thin, his jaw trembling. Tia Lucia, once my mocking critic, was squinting, nodding, tears shining. Carmen's hands covered her mouth, eyes wide. A journalist asked, "What would you say to those who doubted you?" I paused, not angry, not triumphant, just tired and grateful. "If you only expect the mundane, you'll get the world you settled for," I said simply. "But if you risk hope, sometimes you change that world." The applause wasn't loud as much as it was real. My parents joined me on stage for the photo. Mama clung to my arm, her hand steadying. Papa managed a frayed smile. Later, as cameras flickered, he whispered in my ear, "I didn't see it. I should have listened more." It meant more than applause. Neighbors and local friends stopped me after, flushed with pride and regret. Tia Lucia squeezed my shoulder. For once, no jokes. Even Professor Nunez took my hand and said, "You saw what the rest of us missed." The city outside glowed in the late afternoon, Castilla sky blue and high. As the official cars left and the crowds ebbed, I stood with my family beneath the shadow of the new center, the streets ringing with normal life. At dinner that night, all of us wedged around the old wood table. Mama asked if I'd be home more now. Marta wanted to show my published papers to her class. Papa poured a glass of wine, said a quiet toast. My old shame was still there, but smaller, worn like a scar. Afterward, I stood on the balcony, breathing in the bitter orange of evening and Madrid's far-off music. I had left with a dream they'd all mocked. I had come back not to boast but to share what had grown. There would always be struggle. And sometimes courage looked like coming home, letter in hand, all the laughter and disbelief behind me, replaced at last by recognition, a seat at the table under my own name.